With Donald Trump back in the White House, many are questioning whether the age of liberal democracy is coming to an end. So what does a second Trump term mean for the United States over the next 4 years? And what impact will his foreign policy have on the Middle East? This week on Up Front, I ask those questions to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and former war correspondent Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges, thanks so much for joining me on Up Front.
Yeah, Mark, thanks.
Good to see you. Now, we are now officially at the beginning of the Trump administration, part 2. This is a president who has previously threatened to deploy the military against what he described as radical left lunatics. He's told supporters that they might not ever need to vote again after his victory. And this is somebody who called for mainstream media outlets to be investigated for treason. What do you see as some of the most significant challenges that the United States is going to face over the next 4 years?
Well, you just named them, except everything was put in place by the Democrats to begin with. The party of censorship is the Democratic Party. The party of war is the Democratic Party. The party of mass surveillance is the Democratic Party. The party that turbocharged neoliberalism, whether it was NAFTA, the destruction of the welfare system, the deregulation of the FCC, the tearing down the firewalls between investment and commercial banks. Glass-Steagall is the Democratic Party. All he has to do is flip a switch, and he has an authoritarian state, including, of course, all the executive orders. Those predate
Before we get to
Trump.
the orders, this is interesting because there are a lot of people watching who would see the policies you've laid out as the product of Republican administrations. They'd say, the shrinking of the government, the expansion of the military, that's Reagan's stuff. They'd say, mass criminalization, it happens because of Republican efforts to change the status quo. They would look at all of these policies and say, hey, Democrats were complicit, but this is rooted in republicanism.
No, it's rooted in Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter began it. Reagan picked it up, but the most seismic damage was done under Clinton, perpetuated by Bush, Obama, and everyone else. And what you had was essentially the merger of two parties into one party. And that's why with the rise of what my friend Glenn Ford used to call Trump's white man's party, you had a transformation which was, the Clinton administration was pivotal, where the Democratic Party transformed itself into the Republican Party, and the Republican Party was pushed so far to the right it became insane and cultish. And you have to think of Trump as a cult figure, not as a political figure. And so, no, the Democratic Party is as or more complicit. And then with the breakdown of the Republican Party and its transfer of its allegiance to Trump, you saw the establishment wing of the Republican Party merge with the Democratic Party, Liz Cheney. I mean, Harris's vapid, celebrity-filled, issue-less campaign was
you taking no prisoners today.
Was promoting her endorsement by Dick Cheney, a war criminal who left office with a 13% approval rating. I mean, it shows you how utterly out of touch the Democratic Party has become. But let's say the ruling class. I mean, they live in an echo chamber which is perpetuated by the media. So they actually don't have a clue about, number one, the damage that they've inflicted. Their whole 30 million mass layoffs since 1996. And I know half of my family comes from rural Maine. I've seen what NAFTA does. Their reaction is not one I embrace, but I understand the desperation, the anger, the legitimate anger. The towns that, like where my grandparents are from in Mechanic Falls, Maine, the bank is boarded up. I mean, I remember as a boy, they were never made a lot of money, but my grandfather worked in the post office and we're deconstructing all of these institutions that once he had a pension, he had a stable income. That's vanished. It's gone. And the Democratic Party is as complicit.
Let me pause you for a second, because I want to drill down on some of these things. You said a lot of really important things. One of the things you just talked about was an out-of-touch elite. We're certainly seeing a growing concentration of wealth and political power among a very small group of people. I think most notably of the fact that Trump has assembled the richest set of advisors and cabinet members in American history. They're worth a collective $450 billion. And of course, there's increased corporate influence and billionaire influence over the Democrats, the Republicans, over the whole political scene. How much of that context is important for understanding the future of American democracy? Is American democracy under threat because of this stuff?
Under threat? Does it exist, Mark? I don't think it exists. It's a veneer. It's the end of the Roman Empire. You have the symbols, the iconography, and the language of a democracy, but internally, corporations and oligarchs have seized all of the levers of power. I looked at this election as a battle between corporatists and oligarchs. Corporatists, the Democrats, they want something very different from oligarchs. Corporatists want stability, they want decorum, the kind of decorum that Obama had or Bush had, or Bush was an idiot, but at least he had some, they could clean him up a little bit. And Biden, whatever his cognitive failings were, because they want stability, especially in terms of trade agreements, because they make investments overseas. Takes a while for a return on a profit. Corporatists want something different from oligarchs. Oligarchs are about chaos. They're about, as Steve Bannon said, deconstructing the administrative state. Why? Because it is a pure form of rentier capitalism. And by that I mean that they make their money by setting up toll booths, Amazon, all of these digital media platforms. It's not about producing goods. And the more that the state is deconstructed, that's why they want to abolish the Department of Education. Everything that we need as a civil society becomes privatized. And you see it in, I wrote a book called America, the Farewell Tour. It begins in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where everything, the sewer system's privatized, the parking authority is privatized, the electricity is privatized, and of course they've jacked up the rates. And the services are not very good. And they want to privatize the post office so we can have a dysfunctional post office like the UK, which is privatized. And so that's what oligarchs want. And the oligarchs have won. They won. And but that's what this battle was about in terms of if we strip away its the kind of trivia or the cultural differences between the two parties. That at its core was what it's about. And so we have, as you point out, we have now an oligarchic system. But as Aristotle wrote, once you create an oligarchic system with those kinds of inequities, then your only two choices are tyranny or revolution.
Mm-hmm. You talk about people choosing fascism. People, or the conditions being set for people to almost have no alternative choice. And you've written about this idea. You wrote an article, in fact, that I thought was super interesting, how fascism came. Now, that term itself has its roots in Mussolini's authoritarian rule during World War I. I think of brutal oppression. I think of the crushing of dissent. Is it not hyperbolic at this moment in history to say that that's what we're facing here?
Well, every fascist system has its own peculiar characteristics. So you mentioned Mussolini. That was rooted in ancient Rome and the glory of Augustus and all this, whereas German fascism was rooted in Teutonic myths, and Spanish fascism under Franco was something different. Robert Paxton, when he writes his book, The Anatomy of Fascism, he calls the Klan the most authentic fascist movement in American history. And again, Paxton, in the book, says that it won't come with jackboots and the swastika. It will become with the Christian cross and mass recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance. And I certainly came away after spending 2 years with the Christian right with a belief that these people, that they had politicized and used Christianity to build a native fascistic movement, of course grounded in white supremacy, and you've seen Trump has no ideology; he's just a grifter. But he has filled that ideological void with these figures like